Life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 with Neil Johnson on Vision.
You'll be aware that there has been huge controversy over the Albanese government's backtracking on the former Morrison government's decision to recognise West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now it's even reported a US-based pro-Israel group has launched a campaign against the Albanese government's decision. That group is called Stand With Us, and reportedly placing a half-page advertisement in the Weekend Australian just recently saying Jerusalem was already the capital of the Jewish people when Rome did not exist, and Australia's only inhabitants were the indigenous people on the land. So it has been Israel's capital for a very long time. Israel commentator and tour guide Stan Goodenough, known as the Jerusalem Watchman, has been following developments and international sentiments about Australia's move. He's back with us. Stan, welcome back to 2020.
Good to be with you again, Neil. Thank you.
Stan, the thought that there is only one Jerusalem, one city united, this is something you're pretty firm about, and you can argue the point.
It's a very simple fact of history that since Jerusalem's very first mention in what are today archaeological remains, and of course the Bible, which almost every Western nation has built its civilization upon, before any of those Western nations existed, thousands of years ago, Jerusalem was conquered by a Hebrew king called David. It was a single entity. And for 3,000 years, Jerusalem was a united city, a single city. For 19 short years, Jerusalem was divided because the Jordanian forces that attacked the new state of Israel, or the reborn state of Israel in 1948, divided and occupied the eastern side of the city for 19 years. For 19 years, it occupied Judea and Samaria. And Jordan changed its name from Transjordan to Jordan, and said that Judea and Samaria were the West Bank. So for 19 years, out of thousands of years, for 19 years, Judea and Samaria has been known as the West Bank. For 19 years, out of thousands of years, Jerusalem was a divided city with barbed wire down the center. In 1967, the status quo was restored. The thousands and thousands of years old status quo was restored. Jerusalem has always been a single city. There's never been a West Jerusalem, never, except in the minds of belligerent anti-Israel governments and forces like the Jordanians, who, I have to stress, the international community said were illegally occupying Judea and Samaria and half of Jerusalem. So they were ousted after they fired the first shot. They were ousted by Israel. And now the city is reunited, and the Knesset, the Jerusalem Parliament, voted in 1980 to extend all Jerusalem to extend sovereignty over all of the city. And it's back where it's always been. In fact, there is no West Jerusalem. There is no such entity. But the Morrison government decided that, and it was. We can maybe unpack this a bit in detail.
Let's do this, Stan. Yeah, okay. When you say the Morrison government, because Scott Morrison recognised West Jerusalem as the capital, but you're suggesting that in doing so, he's made a mistake that's going to have some damaging consequences. How do you describe what the mistake was?
Maybe I can put the background to this decision by the Morrison government. What was happening in Australia in the months leading up to that decision? Thousands and thousands of Christians all around Australia, in all of your main cities, signed onto a petition and sent letters to your government, to the government in Canberra, asking Australia to treat Israel as Australia treats every other country on the planet that it has relations with, and recognize Jerusalem, the single united city of Jerusalem, as the capital. Donald Trump, who was then president, was en route, as the Americans say, to doing so. And there was a real hope in Australia that Australia would lead the way. there were memories of the charge at Beersheba, which was being commemorated for over a century by that point. And the call went out from Australian Christians: let's lead the way on Jerusalem. That's what the Australian Christians who signed the petition wanted. Not the recognition of Western Jerusalem, but the recognition of all of Jerusalem. The petition was read out. It's in the Hansard. Nothing happened in that direction. When Prime Minister Morrison decided to recognize Western Jerusalem, there was a kind of a semi sigh of relief that something had been done. The problem is that by recognizing Western Jerusalem, you also recognize that there's an Eastern Jerusalem. And so the very act of recognizing Western Jerusalem divided the city. So Morrison, in fact, put his stamp on a divided city. And we really wanted him, I say we because, of course, I was very passionate about this, still am, we really wanted him to see that both as a Christian and as a prime minister of a democracy who knows his Bible, that Jerusalem belongs to Israel as a single city, as a united city. By recognizing Eastern Jerusalem, even if it was only by inference, when he said we will recognize Western Jerusalem, which, by the way, Neil, I have to say, is a little bit, sorry, but a little bit strange, because nobody was questioning Israel's presence in Western Jerusalem, as it was called.
So we might even speculate that Scott Morrison might have been trying to be tricky in some way in dividing the city in order to appease some and appease another side as well, making everyone happy.
Yes, well, you're right, I think, Neil. And the trouble with appeasing, as we all know, and there's a history full of tragedy as a result of appeasing aggressors and belligerent people, is that when we try and appease those who are demanding half of Israel as their new state and half of Jerusalem as the capital of their new state of Palestine, we're actually strengthening them. We're not securing any kind of peace, any kind of settlement. We're actually strengthening the belligerency of those who insist that they will, actually, as they say themselves, will eventually have it all of the land of Israel and all of Jerusalem. That's what they believe. So I think that you used the word tricky. I'm not sure what that means in the Australian context, but certainly I think he was trying to find some. It wasn't sorry, forgive me, Australians, but it wasn't a courageous move. There was no real vision in it. Nothing. In fact, it created potential. And Penny Wong, when she reversed it, I mean, that in itself is not a non-event. That in itself is awful. That Australia rejects or refuses to recognize even part of Jerusalem. But do you understand this, the conundrum of this, the difficulty of trying to untangle this situation now?
Well,
what should Australia now see? Right.
Talk about tangle and untangle, because now on the opposition side, the Deputy Liberal leader, Susan Lee, and the Shadow Attorney General, Julian Leeser, have reportedly travelled to Israel to reaffirm the coalition's commitment to West Jerusalem as the nation's capital. And of course, as you say, as Penny Wong has done, the Albanese government has done, they've backtracked on that and they're not recognising it at all. But you say that for those who are upset with Penny Wong's reversal, you've got to be careful with the way you respond and the wording that you use, because it can perpetuate a fallacy.
I think very likely some listeners may think I have an enormous chutzpah, as we say in Israel, enormous nerve, presumption. But from where I'm standing, as I like to say on the walls of Jerusalem, from where I'm standing, what I think is the only way to salvage this is that those who are coming to Israel from the opposition now in Australia should come out full-throated and say, we made a mistake recognizing Western Jerusalem. We should have recognized all of Jerusalem, and we will now recognize Jerusalem as a united city. I think that's the only way. I mean, of course, it'll create an enormous backlash in liberal circles, and of course, but it's it'll pull the rug out from under what Penny Wong has tried to do, in my opinion, because what she's done is really set a trap. The more we affirm, or the more we protest, withdrawing the recognition of West Jerusalem, the more we substantiate the belief that there is a West Jerusalem and an East Jerusalem. And I think that's dangerous.
So you suggest that Israel's enemies will use Scott Morrison's words to perpetuate the thought that Jerusalem is divided. And
Absolutely.
Perhaps a solution would be if Labor changed its direction and they could fix the issue by declaring the whole of Jerusalem is Israel's capital. If they did that, they'd sort of be heroes, wouldn't they?
Not Labor.
Yes,
Not
no,
Labor.
That's what I'm saying. If Labor changed their position and declared the whole of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, rather than none at all, or not the West, that's a way you could fix it.
Yes, except, I'm sorry, I wasn't very clear. I don't believe that Labour government would ever even countenance such a thought. What I thought I understood that people from the opposition, the shadow secretary, the people from the opposition were on their way to Israel to try and reverse this.
Well, they were, but they're not in government
okay.
now, so they don't actually have a say at the moment. So all I'm saying is that if the Labor government in Australia has made such a bad decision, if it were to be corrected, then they would be able to recognise Jerusalem as a whole. But it doesn't seem to be happening either side of our government in Australia.
So, no, I think what my thinking is that the government's not going to do that. The Labor government's not going to do that. But that those who are waiting for the next election, those who are preparing to run again when Australia has its next general election, I don't know, 3 years' time, that they will already set as a plank in their platform recognition of all Jerusalem as a united city. That is going to be their position on Jerusalem. I also think, as one who believes in the covenant God made with Abraham, that blessing will fall on that party that takes a stand on the biblical position on Jerusalem. I think that's an answer there for the future. I don't honestly see any change in the current government's actual attitude towards Israel or towards Jerusalem.
And that reinforces, doesn't it, Labor's attitude to Israel and the Palestinian tensions that has now gone on for quite some time. It's not likely to change. As I was saying, the possibility of a fix, Labor could actually do that. But I'm acknowledging what you're saying there, Stan. But for listeners who want to connect more on this issue, and it gets deeper and it's a sophisticated issue to be able to grapple with, listeners might want to connect directly with Stan Goodenough. Stan is known as the Jerusalem Watchman, and you can subscribe to the sorts of things that Stan writes about and gets into some of the detail. Best way is to send him an email at zionwarrior@gmail.com. But you can also connect with Stan at his Jerusalem Watchman website, jerusalemwatchman.org. Stan Goodenough, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today on 2020.
Thank you again, Neil. Take care.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.